Good morning, everyone. This is Kyle DeHaas with FranNet in Central Texas. I'm here with Mary Kronk. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, Kyle.
And we are here to talk about franchise facts fast. So we're going to keep this action packed and short. And today we're going to talk about how to fail at franchising.
That's such a harsh topic, but it's so impactful. People always think about what success looks like. That's very important, no doubt.
Sure.
But also, you want to make sure that you know what the pitfalls are out there.
Yeah, and I'd love to distinguish this from the deer in the headlights syndrome where you focus so much on how to fail that you end up failing. We don't want to do that. So let's talk about them, acknowledge that they exist. And in a future discussion, we'll talk about how to get beyond that fear of failure. But first, let's identify them. There's a few that, well, what's the first one on your mind?
The first one on my mind is the one that the Small Business Administration really highlights, and that's undercapitalization.
Mm,
Someone didn't have enough money to start the business nor keep it going.
yeah. I heard an interesting statistic that the number one reason for business failure of all businesses in the US generally is undercapitalization, not getting to have enough capital to get to break even. Um, now, so franchises have an FTD, and item number 7 lists the capital requirements. In your experience, does that help mitigate the risk if you know how much capital you need?
Absolutely. So, in franchising, when you look at item 7, you're looking at every cost category it's taking. And by the way, item 7 comes from the franchise disclosure document as the franchisor publishes and provides it to you as a qualified prospective franchisee. But they have to tell you within ranges what it's going to cost for each cost category to get this business up and running, and even some allowance for working capital. Now, that
Hmm.
information is helpful. The next biggest step is really understanding how that's worked for the current owners when you get to the point of talking to them about their businesses and what the true costs were for getting in. You just want to make sure things are aligned and that you have a really good idea of what you're going to need.
So I'm hearing that if you follow a process for doing the research, you can triangulate what you're reading in the franchise disclosure document about how much capital you get, triangulate that against the experience of the owners, and then you can get a realistic version of what it's going to be like to open a business in your market as a franchise, and that mitigates the number one risk of business failure. And it's funny. Fear is often based in the lack of knowledge or the lack of fact about something, and that's something I think that both of us pound home is let's get the facts. And this is, straight dope on how to do this. If we can know, even if there's a lot of commas and zeros in that number, it's better to know how much a franchise takes to capitalize than to not know, and thereby avoid that. So we talked about undercapitalization. What else? What else is on your mind?
One that I hear often, and I understand where it comes from, but people take the product or the service that they want to provide and make it the main decision criteria for getting into business.
Oh,
And what I mean by that is, just to give you an example, someone falls in love with the ice cream that comes from the ice cream shop. So therefore,
mhm.
they want to be in the ice cream business. It tastes great. So from a consumer perspective, that absolutely makes sense. But where the
Yep.
challenge is understanding how that business actually works and operates. In an ice cream business, you have hourly employees, so you may have some turnover that you need to consider. You're going to have a perishable inventory, so suffer maybe from some shrinkage and spoilage, but it's also
Mhm.
difficult to count ice cream scoops.
That's a really good one. That liking the product or service. When somebody comes to me, my most cringeworthy event doing franchise work is when somebody comes to me and says, I love that business because I love the way the food tastes, or there's a line out the door. Those are totally misplaced reasons for getting a business. But if that same person came to me and said, I really love that business because I'm great at managing perishable inventory and high turnover, low wage employees, then what I'm hearing there is somebody who is self-aware enough to understand that they're taking the entrepreneur's perspective on the business rather than the consumer, And that's a real challenge to, change that mindset. Um,
Finding the right business is really being cognizant of what it's going to take to manage and operate that business, and knowing that you have the skill sets necessary to do it, or that you can hire that done. Or in the case of franchising, perhaps they have systems that help you pick those things up along the way.
Absolutely. And I think that also beginning with the end in mind and what the goal is for owning a business helps to get out of that consumer perspective as well. I mean, there's very few people that are going to wake up in the morning and say, gee, I'd love to run a residential painting company or a trash hauling business. But those can be vehicles to get to your goal if you look at it from an owner oriented perspective rather than as a consumer.
Absolutely.
So what else is there? What other pitfall and how else would you fail at franchising?
Oh my goodness. So, in the city that we're in, really in many major cities across the United States, there's always a need for IT services, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And please forgive me if I've landed on your work, right? This is just an example, but we often get people that come to us and say, I really like an IT services business. And a lot of times it's because they've pictured themselves working in the business behind computers, when the reality of it is, to run an IT services business, you've got to have business development experience. You've got to go out there and find those customers to be
Yes.
to hire the people to perform the function of the work. And so sometimes my point here is, the biggest pitfall is thinking that you need industry experience because you want to work in the business instead of on it. And most franchises are looking for people who want to work on the business, not necessarily in the business. There are some exceptions there.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
for executive style businesses, it's more about working on the business.
Absolutely. And if you're going to do a B2B executive model, you have to ask yourself what's the highest and best use of the owner's time. And in the beginning, it's often in business development, especially if it's in tech. I don't know if you were teeing me up, but I ran a managed services franchise for several years. I did it with my brother, and I knew full well, I've past experience in tech biz dev, right? And my brother did not. And I took him on some of the calls that I was making. He absolutely hated it. He was the guy that loved to be behind running the operation. He was good at it, and I didn't want to do that. But yeah, I think that there's what a business is like on the outside is not exactly what it is once you look underneath the covers. Again, it takes a process to figure that out, and that's what we're offering. I think also maybe related to that is having industry experience in the business that you're running. Um, I've when I look back on all the clients that I've worked at, I can only think of maybe one or two out of hundreds that actually had industry experience in a business they eventually successfully ran as a franchise.
Most
How about
franchisors
you?
would report that as well. They would
Yeah.
tell you that it's interesting to me, Kyle, that when we look at different franchise concepts and we look at who their franchisees are, they come from a myriad of backgrounds. But what
Hmm.
they all have in common are those leverageable skills to run that business. They may not have come from the industry, many times didn't come from the industry, but if the business required management, logistics, operations, they had that experience to apply to the business. Or,
Yeah.
like you mentioned before, if they had sales and marketing, customer service experience, they had those skills to apply to that business, regardless of what their previous industry was.
Absolutely. I think a good example of that is, I work with lots of folks that we all do that come out of the military, and they acquire skills over time that may not exactly be relevant to a private sector, but there's other softer skills that are transferable that they've picked up over the years. Even basic things like discipline, ability to lead, ability to follow a system, organizational skills that can be applied to any business, right? And I mean, think of it this way. If you don't have any experience, and we also know that the best way to be successful at franchising is to follow the model, and the only training that you've gotten is from the franchisor, What are you more likely to do there? Follow the model and be successful.
Absolutely.
Misplaced passion. I think that's probably the last one we could talk about. What does that mean to you?
It means a couple different things, but I think you and I both hear this every day from our clients. We want to be passionate about the
Mm-hmm.
business.
Find your
If you think
passion.
about the previous things that we talked about making the product or service the main decision criteria for getting into business. We talked about having industry experience. These things kind of tie together in misplaced passion. But like I said, see it come up in two ways. One, in terms of sales skills, I've heard many people say to me, if I believe in it, if I have passion for it, I can sell anything.
Sure.
And the reality of it is, if they don't have that experience or thick enough skin, right, it can that sales rejection can be enough to make you want to hide under the table. So it's really important that you
Yep.
understand how the product or service is going to market and what your role in that is going to be. The other way that it comes up, and again, please forgive me if I land on someone's hobby here, but people tell me all the time that if they have a particular hobby or particular passion for something, that they would like to make it a business. And so, over the years, I've worked with gentlemen that tell me that they work on cars in their garage, therefore they'd really like to have an automotive business. And when I dig in to figure out why, it's because they're thinking about mass producing that hobby. They want to be working on cars and under hoods the whole time.
Yep.
The reality of it is, in that particular business, once you start to mass produce, or in any business, once you start to mass produce your hobby, it's no longer a hobby, it's now work, right?
Can I?
You have created a job for yourself, but maybe not the right job. Because if you're
There's,
going to own an automotive business, you really want to be focused on hiring the right people, driving the marketing, growing fleet sales, right? Really increasing the volume of that business. Otherwise, you've got this issue where you're working in the business and not necessarily on the business. And that's where the money gets made. So I don't know about you, Kyle, but when I've worked with people who have been passionate about the business that they got into, it was because the business gave them more time, more money, more freedom. I worked with a gentleman several years ago who came from a very prestigious management company out of Chicago. He moved to Austin, Texas, and he invested in a janitorial services master franchise. He told all his buddies at his previous work, he said, I'm moving to Austin. I'm getting into this business. Man, what? You're going to clean toilets? His role in that was not cleaning toilets, right?
that's right. That's right.
His role was going out, getting the contracts, managing the contracts, even helping other people get into business for themselves by sub franchising out the work, right? So, not a very glamorous business, but it gave him the time, the money, the freedom to do the things that he wants to do. And he really, I've stayed in touch with him all these years. He's been very charitable with a few different things that were really, really important to him. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so that's where the business has really grown and it's been very, very successful for him. Uh,
Yes.
it was more a matter of the business just being a vehicle to help him get to his ultimate goals. That's what he was really passionate about.
Yep. And I think that having some self awareness and emotional maturity about what that passion is can be helpful. I think of one of my clients, for example, really successful, self aware, intelligent guy. We were having our one of our calls, and he was bent over the hood of his car replacing his battery. And he had a light bulb moment at that point. He's like, I love working on this mechanic stuff. And he knew that that wasn't going to be what his ultimate role in any business was going to be. But he knew that something where it was kind of mechanical, but he was solving a customer problem, would keep him engaged enough on a day to day that he could get to the goal that he wanted, which was to replace his sizable former salary. And eventually he went into a business where he had technicians that had to be certified in a mechanical type of repair, in HVAC, to get there. And but that was the light bulb moment for it. I could hear him saying, putting those together, but in a really emotionally self-aware way. Like he knew that he wasn't going to be that tech, but he knew he needed to be the executive that led those people. And I think that is a good example of well-placed passion.
Absolutely.
You
And
know,
that's another very big success example. That gentleman has grown that business very
yeah,
large.
you know who I'm talking about. You know I'm talking about you. I know you're out there. So love to see success like that. So I think that's about all that we've got for today. Any parting thoughts before we break?
If you're going to look at franchises, do your homework, figure out what you're really passionate about, regardless of what the business may be, and think really hard about how you're going to use your skill sets to grow it so you can be passionate about what it's going to do for you.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And if you want to do that and you want to talk to one of us, there's some links to how to get a hold of us in the description of this video. Until next time, we'll see you in a couple of weeks with a new episode of Franchise Facts Fast. I'm Kyle. Mary,
Mary,
thank you for being here.
thanks, Kyle.
Bye bye.